So you've made it this far into the Prem Professional playlist. So today we're going to be taking a look at the timeline. The main thing with the timeline is we're going to be going over a few tips, a few tricks, and hopefully once we've finished this episode, you should be somewhat of a timeline master. Okay, so the first thing we're going to be looking at is actually the toolbar. So along the left hand side here, you've got a bunch of tools that we can use on the timeline. The first thing we're going to be looking at is the eraser tool. So the shortcut for that is C on your keyboards, and if you ever need to go back to the selection tool, it's V. So you can go V, C. So we're going to be on C for the eraser tool. Now what this lets us do is as we move along our timeline, we can actually chop the clips up into sections as we want to on the actual timeline itself, rather than having to do it in that monitor here. It's useful if you've done some editing on the monitor up here, brought it in, but you need to do a bit more refining, maybe just chop off a couple frames. You can zoom all the way in and actually cut off just individual frames left and right, and use the selection tool to select those and hit delete. It's not really useful for adding stuff, it's more of taking away, suggested by the eraser tool. So you can use it to chop out chunks within a bit of film, and I'm going to show you how we can fill that gap up in just a second. Okay, great, so we've done some cutting up on our timeline, as you can see here. However, it's left some pretty big chunks of just black. There's nothing in there, there's no content, but it's the video still playing, and obviously that's not the best way to handle things if we're planning to do sort of like a continuous sequence. So rather than picking up each individual clip and dragging it over and over each time, we can actually do, really simply, is just click on a space so it becomes selected like this, and if you hit the delete key, it will actually pull everything from the right hand side and squeeze it back in that gap. So you can simply just click on a gap, hit delete, and you can see now that our sequence is again one continuous sequence. So rather than dragging each individual clip, just hit on the sequence gap, hit delete, and that's it, simple as that. Okay, so the next part of our sort of like tips for the timeline is we're going to be looking at moving a bunch of clips at the same time. So yes, you can go and hold shift and select individually the clips that you want to move and move it like that, but there are a few other ways to do it that makes it slightly more easier. The first thing you can do is if you'd like to select all clips rather than having to zoom out and kind of drag over all of them like this, you could be at any point, and if you press Control A on your keyboard, that will select every single clip you have on the timeline. So audio, video, absolutely everything. And then you can always shift it forward a little bit if you need to put a title card or something like that right at the front. Really simple. If you want to move just a selection of clips forward, so not everything, if you just press A on your keyboard, you get these little arrows pop up. And what that lets you do is if we want to move everything, say after this clip, we can click there and drag it forward, and you can see all of this is staying in place. However, everything else on our timeline has shifted down after that clip, which is great. You can also do the reverse, so if I just select everything and pull it this way a second, there we go. If we hold shift and A, it actually sends our arrows going in the opposite direction, so then we can pull clips back, leaving a gap for us to put something or some content in that space there. Very nice and simple. So that's A to go forward and Shift A to go backwards, and if you want to select everything, Control A. Lots of A's. Okay, next stop on our timeline tutorial is actually going to be making working in the timeline easier, because we want to make it as easy as possible for us, because then editing is easier. The first thing you probably see me be using in the video already is zooming in and out. Obviously you can use this little circle here to zoom in and out, and that makes getting closer into clips to make the fine edits much easier. Or if you want to see it as a whole, you can zoom all the way out and get a good idea of what it looks like there. Something else we can do is also increase the height of the actual tracks themselves, and that lets us do a few more options when we do so. So you can see if I just click here where I get this little symbol pop up, I can drag upwards, and you can see now it's extended all my video clips, and I can actually see thumbnails now of those videos. So that just gives me a slightly better idea without having to actually play the video what clip is there. Something you may have also noticed is that we have this white line running just faintly across the top of our video. That actually controls the opacity. So if I start to bring this line down, you can see the numbers decreasing on the screen. That corresponds to the opacity of the clip. So if I let go around here, this is now 50% opacity, which means obviously it's got a lot darker because the background's black. If I put a clip underneath here, let me just drag this one across, you should be able to see both, as the top one, she almost looks like a ghost now, but the top one obviously has its opacity turned down. Oh, two of them have appeared. So adjusting that means you can tweak the opacity. I'm just pressing Ctrl Z to undo, and if you want to, you can take it all the way down to 0, where it's basically invisible, but it's still playing on your timeline. So if for some reason your clip's playing but it's gone completely dark, you may have accidentally dragged your opacity line all the way down, so just pop that back up to the top, make sure it says 100, and there we go. That's all good. Funnily enough, you can actually do a similar sort of thing with the audio channel. So at the moment, there's no white line there, so to get that up, we just got to drag it down a little bit, and there we go, there's our white line. Obviously, as audio is not a visual thing, it's not going to be controlling our opacity. Instead, this time, it controls our volume. So if we want to lower the volume of this track, we can again drag it down. You can see it's measured in decibels, so you can go all the way down. If it's minus infinity, that means it's completely silent. You won't hear it at all. So that's one way to mute your clips. Or you can have it quiet in the background if you've planned to have somebody else talk over the top, or you just want it as some background noise. So it's a really easy way to lower the volume of your clips and just stay a bit more organized in the timeline. Okay, so the next step is adding some clips in. So like I mentioned in the basics video, if we just take a clip and drag it in over the top, it's obviously going to cut a chunk out of our video there. It's kind of cut it in half, and if you're not careful, sometimes it can actually chunk out the audio line as well. So that's obviously very disruptive, not what we're looking for if we want to put a clip in between two clips. But what we can do is, if I'm dragging it out of our timeline here and I want to squeeze it in this gap, but I obviously don't want to cut off any of that footage, I can just hold Control on my keyboard and you see these arrows pop up. And what these do allows us to drop the clip in place and shove everything forward. It makes it really nice and easy if you've done a big edit and you're like, oh, I don't want to make all these tweaks and changes. Just hold Control whilst you're dropping a clip in, and that will shove all your clips forward and allowing you to drop it in place very nicely. Okay, so we're going to be moving on to something which may sound simple but can get a bit complicated in Premiere Pro, and that's just simply copying and pasting a clip. The simple way is to click on a clip and hold Alt and drag. That just duplicates a clip onto the timeline. Just careful where you drop it again, you don't want it overlapping anything, but a really simple way of just copying and pasting. If you are going to use Control C and Control V, just be careful, because wherever your video and audio channels are highlighted, that's where it's going to drop. So if I want to paste a clip over the top of this one, right now it's just going to paste it and cut off our existing clip. However, if I select video channel 2 and take off video channel 1, take off audio channel 1 but leave audio channel 2 on, when I hit paste, you can see it actually pastes onto those channels rather than being disruptive and destroying our existing footage. So make sure you utilize the sort of on and off switches on the video channels and the audio channels, so copy and pasting becomes a little bit easier. Sometimes you'll be editing clips and you'll be really happy, you don't want anything else to happen to them, but you want to move things around, you want to adjust some settings, but you're happy with that clip. What you can do is you can put it on another layer. Sometimes I put it right to the top just to make sure it's out of the way, and we've got this little padlock icon over here. When you hit that, it will actually hash out the whole layer of that video track, and nothing can happen to it. You can't click on it, you can't move it, you can't do anything at all, so you know that is safe. You can do whatever else you want to onto the timeline, add effects, anything like that, and that will always sit there. And then when you're ready to open it back up again, you just hit the button again and it's unlocked. Nice and simple. I mentioned it a little bit in the first video, but we've also got a few other switches that we can click on that can control things on our timeline. So down here in our audio layer, we've got mute track and solo track. So if you want to mute the whole thing, a whole track, you can hit that, and now that whole track will be muted even if you export it. Remember that. If you hit solo, it means it will only play that track. So even if you have 50 layers of audio, if you press solo, it will just hear that one track, which is really nice if you're trying to build up sort of ambient sounds, things like that in the background. You can solo the track, hear what it sounds like, adjust the volume, which is quite important. And you can also lock those audio tracks just like you can with a video track, which I do very often. So it's really nice to be able to solo and mute stuff there. You've also got this little toggle track output, so if you don't want to view that anymore and you want to get an idea of what's underneath the clip, so I can go from seeing the video on top to the video underneath, I can just hit that little icon there. Very easy to see sort of what you want to turn on and off and toggle the actual output channels. Really simple. Another really helpful tool in the timeline is the snap function. So by default, whenever you move a clip close to another clip, it should sort of snap into place, and you don't have to worry too much about overlapping, because you know, unless you force it over that line, there's a little bit of leeway in where your clip snaps to. However, sometimes you may find that this doesn't happen, and the only thing you need to do is just make sure that this magnet icon is highlighted. So you can see when it's turned off, there's no sort of force snapping there. I could just move it over a little bit, which can be useful sometimes. However, when I have that magnet icon on, it will now just snap into place when I move it between other clips. So that's really useful to know. Sometimes it switches off by itself, so just clicking that icon there should resolve that issue. Okay, so we're going to look a bit into markers now. They're really useful for labeling your footage, getting an idea of what section of your video you'd like to work on, where you've been, some important parts of your video that you've been working on too, and you can always jump back to different points. So you almost imagine them as bookmarks within your timeline. So to add a marker, make sure you haven't got any clips selected, and you can hit the little icon up here called Add Marker, or you can just hit M on your keyboard. You can see now that little green marker's been added for us already, and we can right click and do Edit Marker to adjust the settings. So on here we can give it a name, so we can call it chapter 1, and a comment, so if anything important happens in this at this moment, we can write down a few notes. So waking up, that would do for now, and we can assign a colour. So if you want to be all organised about it, you can give certain things different colours. So you could pick chapter 1 or anything with a certain character or an actor in, you can assign a certain colour to them, and once you're done you can just hit OK, and you can see that marker's changed colour, but it's still in the same place. What you can also do is hold the Alt key, and you can split that marker. Once you've split it, you can actually drag it out to any length you want, and now that's set the marker over a certain amount of time rather than just in one single place. If you go to Window and then click on the markers window icon here, you can actually open it up and you can see all the markers you have, and no matter where you are you can then click on this and it will jump to the very start of that marker. The best thing is that any notes you've added in the description, you can actually search for them. So if you've noted down some key phrases or any key moments, you can just search for those moments in the little search bar up here. Works just like Google really, and then your markers will appear. You can click on that and you'll go straight to that piece within your sequence. You can also filter via colour, so if you want to just see, if you have done it, set it out by actor or by character, you can just click on the colour, and then you can then see all the markers you've assigned for that character. So if you want to stay organised and keep a nice track of where your footage is, you can use markers to lay out little segments without interrupting your actual workflow. Really useful. Sometimes when you play clips, you can see them being quite laggy, a bit glitchy, or don't seem to be playing out properly. They just need to be rendered so they can be played out at a proper speed. Sometimes when you add effects, they need to be rendered so they work properly as well. To do that, you can just hit enter on your keyboard and that will start the rendering process. But if you want to make sure you render everything in your sequence, you can go up to sequence, render in and out, and that will do absolutely everything in your sequence. Once it's rendered, that bar should turn green, and then when you hit play, everything should run nice and smoothly. And that just about wraps it up for today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. If you've learned something new, brilliant. If you haven't, then, well, fair enough, I'm quite impressed. Hopefully some of that stuff should help you speed up your editing, or at least keep a bit more organised. And we've got plenty more videos coming in this playlist very shortly.